Hello there and welcome. I'm Rev Nhien, founder of Evolving Enneagram. If you've been seeking a compassion-based, contemplative approach to Enneagram-informed transformation, you are most certainly in the right place. This is where contemplation meets the Enneagram. So we are in week 8 of a 12-week Sunday talk series based on the theme, the care of the soul. Throughout these weeks, I've been drawing insights and inspiration from my new book, The Enneagram of the Soul, a 40-day spiritual companion for the 9 types. This week's talk is titled Welcoming Anger on the Contemplative Path by Enneagram Type. I'll begin in part 1 by sharing reflections on anger as a core and universal human emotion that is important to our well-being. In part 2, I'll share some tendencies by Enneagram Type that relate to anger. Again, these are only tendencies. We're never here to put you into a box here. And then in part 3, I'd like to share a practice from my book, which is called the Welcoming Prayer Practice. And this is practice number 2 in the Enneagram of the Soul. Let's begin. In her journal article for Wanting, which is a publication, a journal published by the Center for Action and Contemplation. In this particular article that was written in 2018 on contemplating anger, the late theologian Barbara Holmes wrote, "First, a theology of anger invites us to wake up from the hypnotic influences of unrelenting oppression, so that individuals and communities can shake off the shackles of denial, resignation, and nihilism. Second, a theology of anger can help us to construct healthy boundaries. Finally, the healthy expression of righteous anger can translate communal despair into compassionate action and justice seeking. The question is whether or not we will recognize our wounds and the source of our anger so that we can heal ourselves and others and awaken to our potential to embody the beloved community." I love that Dr. Barbara Holmes recognizes the value of anger in a context in which in our modern day, anger can really be demonized, right? So I want to really name that anger is a universal core human emotion. And like, I think all of our emotions, like sadness when a baby cries in order to get fed, right? That all of these human emotions are there for a reason. In my perspective, none of us are bad. We are not bad people for experiencing anger in any of its forms, even if for many of us it can feel like it. I know for me, as a woman, an Asian woman, with a lot of one-ish and three-ish energies in my life, it's sort of like this not appropriateness of anger has been very strong, and the sense that somehow it's not okay. The layers of that. It's not okay as a woman to have this fire in me. And again, I'm not saying it's just women. I'm just speaking from my personal experience to give an example of how anger can tend to be judged in our society. And each of you out there might have your own storyline about that, about how you have felt limited in or condemned around your expression of anger. So I'm hoping to invite a space here and also within our contemplative practices and Enneagram community for more space to honor and give room for the emotion and the expression of anger. So a big part, I think, of why anger can be demonized is that it can be a very destructive energy, right? Anger can lash out in a room and break things. And so I want to name first that sometimes things need to be broken. That's important to recognize that societal structures and such need to be broken. And oftentimes the destructive aspect of anger has behind it a potentiality around loving construction. And Yes, sometimes when we talk about this destructive anger, we're talking about like an unskillful expression of anger that hurts rather than heals, right? And so, because the outer expression of anger can be so harming, right, or visibly harming in a way that the outer expression of someone's sadness may not, right, or someone's fear may not necessarily. I'm not saying it doesn't, but because of that, I think that's a part of why anger more than the others can be demonized in our society. But I want to name these things so that we can just be on more alert around, oh, yeah, when I see an unskillful expression of anger hurting more than healing, I might then just reinforce within myself how bad anger is, right? Rather than honoring that we're less inclined maybe to see, because our society is less inclined to process, we're less inclined to see what anger looks like when integrated, you know, rendered whole within us, and then is expressed from this more skillful place. And my hope is today's talk will offer a, a path, an invitation for more of that integration of this natural human emotion so that its energy can support wholeness, oneness, and unity. It's the fire, the energizing power can be part of constructing, as Dr. Barbara Holmes said, the beloved community in the world. So I mentioned, being a woman and having a certain relationship to anger. I want to name that Father Richard Rohr, in much of his work around leading retreats for men, have named an issue that many men have he's worked with has faced. So in a Center for Action and Contemplation daily email sent on Tuesday, March 4th, on the topic of honoring our anger and grief, and with material drawn from Father Rohr's recent book, The Tears of Things, he considers this inherent connection between anger and grief, one that he says ultimately heals and liberates. He writes, after a lifetime of counseling and retreat work, not to mention my own spiritual direction, I've become convinced that most anger comes, first of all, from a place of deep sadness. Years ago, when I led male initiation rites at Ghost Ranch, New Mexico, I would watch men's jaws drop open and their faces turn pale when I said this. Life disappoints and hurts us all. And the majority of people, particularly men, don't know how to react, except as children do, with anger and rage. It's a defensive, reactionary, and totally understandable posture, but it often goes nowhere and only creates cycles of bitterness and retaliation. And then in the same passage, Father Rohr quotes the preacher and poet, activist, Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III. And Dr. Otis Moss's words are this: we mourn as we work for change. The challenge is to remember, even in our justified hurt and anger, that answering insult with insult and harm with harm just worsens the situation for everyone. We must remember the words of Dr. King: darkness cannot put out darkness, only light can do that. When we grieve prophetically, we heal ourselves and the world by looking to shape the larger forces that damaged the soul of the person who caused hurt or anger, whether minor or devastating. As we consider blending Enneagram wisdom here with our contemplative journey of awakening to wholeness, oneness, and unity, it's so important to me to address anger. Of course, anger is not the only important emotion. It's just that, again, we can tend to have more space these days. Even in our groups, I'll concede, like when people express sadness or shame, we're like, oh, there's like, or when they express fear and anxiety, there's a space where we might have more holding space or compassion. But what about when people express anger? Can we do that? How about when we have anger? Can we do that? So let's talk about our relationship to anger as I move into part 2 now, to explore tendencies around our relationship to anger by Enneagram type. The Enneagram can be divided into three centers of intelligence, and this is mainly perceptual centers, ways in which we process information. These centers are the body, the head, and the heart center. Each has a core emotion that then becomes like a theme in the personality. And I've even noticed as I've journeyed with people for decades now that depending on your center of intelligence, that core emotion related to your center can be like the first emotion that you make contact with as you begin the process of healing and transformation. So the body center, which is types 8, 9, and 1, that core emotion is anger. Again, this does not mean that other people or other types do not experience anger. It's just more like that first thing on the surface there. In the head center, types 2, 3, and 4, it is shame and sadness. And then in the head center, types 5, 6, and 7, it is fear. So most of us are aware that for type 8, anger is very easily accessed. It rises quickly. It can feel like this rush of energy in the body, and it can also be readily expressed outwardly, right? So anger in eights can tend to be triggered or provoked by injustice or injustice and unfairness, and but less obviously provoked by a sense of vulnerability. Almost like anger is this wing of fire that comes out to guard your vulnerable self. And anger can arise so that people don't take advantage of you if you're an 8, or don't take advantage of those under your protection or your care. Or anger arises so that people don't control you if you're an 8. So just recognizes that these can be triggers based on your Enneagram type, that ultimately dropping down into this experience, you might recognize that vulnerability in that core, almost like this child-like self that the eight's armor protects, is often at the bottom of this emotion of anger for you, a sense of vulnerability. Type 9. So if you're a 9, anger can be very hard to detect. It often takes a lot of inner work over the years to get more in touch with your anger on a regular basis. With average level of self-awareness, everyday self-awareness, 9s are typically just out of touch with their anger, and they genuinely feel like not much phases or bothers them, right? So that's a sincere reaction. It's just that some of that anger is being glossed over inside. So it's said that then anger tends to be under expressed in the 9. It's like the 9 pushes away from an experience of anger or conflict from the outer world as well as the inner world, just pushes it away entirely. At the same time, it can show up in oppositional stances like stubbornness or passive aggressive behavior, especially if the 9 feels that you're trying to control or push them into doing something without their consent. So 9s might even say yes, then just not do the thing that they didn't want to do. Or they might just procrastinate until it's too late to do that thing as their way of being against it, right? And it's important to say this is not to say at all that 9s don't ever explode. When they are pushed too far, or if you catch them at a particularly bad moment, they can let loose on you with volcanic anger that seems to come out of nowhere, sometimes even for them, right? They didn't know they were angry. So, but they've been stuffing it or repressing it for so long for fear of conflict or of rocking the boat. And ultimately, that's the root of it, like this avoidance of conflict, which can feel like disconnection, like a disconnection that they cannot bear. That avoidance is often at the bottom of not wanting to feel your own anger if you're a 9, much less express that anger. For the 1, the anger is typically repressed by type 1s, like shut down, but others can often read it in the 1's body language: clenched jaw, furrowed brow, tense shoulders, a kind of like physical rigidity as they stand against what is. That's the expression of anger common in 1s. Anger tends to arise for 1s as what is doesn't match what the one believes should be. And so this could be what they make when they themselves make mistakes, or when others are not doing things the right or proper or good in integrity way that the one thinks should be done. And I say the one believes, but the one really believes this is an objective right. They don't think this is my personal opinion, right? It's just like this is how things should be. And if it doesn't violate that, the anger rises. So the tricky thing is that type ones try hard not to express anger, as they tend to see it as a bad emotion, except when it's justified. So righteous indignation is the one exception that type ones can make, like to be indignant about, the bad things happening in the world. But usually ones are less connected to their expression of anger, and instead they might express it or describe it in words like I'm frustrated or irritated. Like those feel a lot more palatable, and like good people are like that, but they're not just raging or angry. And when their anger is eventually expressed, ones can be quite intense, even scathing, or even at the extreme explosive. And sometimes they can explode in that anger, and but other times it will just come out in like really harsh criticism. Again, it feels principled. It's that kind of energy. At the bottom of one's anger is often a deep grief for the world as ones think it should be, but it isn't. So that's the anger triad. Now we move into the heart triad, where historically shame and sadness are more at the forefront. But of course, we all experience anger. So let's look at anger tendencies first in type 2 here. Type 2s work hard to present like a happy face. They intuitively sense that they'll be more likable if they remain pleasant. And so, but anger can still tend to come up, and it comes up most when their needs are not being recognized or met. And I must say that this might have gone on for a long time before the anger has been able to rise to the surface. And so twos are often vulnerable to anger when they overextended themselves in giving, or they're just not getting like reciprocation, again, mostly like after a long time, for their kindnesses, for their generosity. The anger arises when they feel underappreciated, undervalued, and they can also more readily access anger to help someone else. This is the line that they have to type 8, where it can feel a little bit more like that 8 energy. But the difference is, unlike 8s, when they get angry, 2s typically have a very narrow frame for that anger and then revert back to more accommodating and sometimes even ingratiating behavior, more people pleasing behavior, much more than an 8 would do. So at the root of it, the trigger for the 2, the core trigger is like that of the fear of losing connection through being pleasing or being liked. And so that's often at the bottom of anger for 2s. For 3s, so threes don't show much outward anger, especially not publicly. Like maybe personally, if the person feels safe to them in like intimate partnership. And it does, of course, because threes are chameleon like. It depends on social norms. Certain cultures might be more expressively angry. And so that might be appropriate in that culture. And so there's more permission. But ultimately, we know that threes are image conscious and don't want it to seem like anything is wrong. And so if I exhibit anger, it might suggest that something's wrong. And there's a part of me that wants to hide that anything's wrong. Three's anger can tend to be triggered by someone slowing their progress in any way, in accomplishing a goal that they have, or in sabotaging and causing them to look bad. And I know for me personally, it's not about wanting to be fake. It's like if there's something that's true about me and someone has like a negative and false notion, oh, like whoa, like my anger could definitely go up. And so yes, anger can get triggered if the image is tarnished or someone's attempting to do that. It can get triggered around concerns about reputation. Remembering there's like a survival instinct in threes around, it's almost like what you think of me is my lifeblood, right? So they can also get angered, yeah, if they feel they might be publicly like humiliated or shamed in any way. It's just really, really huge. So at core, issues of image and concerns around failure are like core triggers for the type three's anger. For the type four, for fours as well as sixes, the anger reactions can really depend on the subtype within this number. Where the sexual four in this case is often seen as the most expressive of their anger. And so you might have heard that the sexual four is a lookalike to the type eight. Whereas the others, the social or the self-preservation form, may express anger much more mildly, like at least on the outside. All fours have great access to their emotional states, right? But what's interesting is, as I mentioned, fours are in the sadness shame triad, and I've noticed that fours can readily go straight to shame. It's almost like bypassing or ignoring the anger part, some of them. So the shame that gets triggered, they end up shaming themselves, or for sexual force, and this is where the lashing out anger can seem more visible, is that they try to shame the others. So they go to shame rather than experience the authentic and more pure experience of anger. And this can come in part from the dramatization of the storytelling. So it's not the pure emotion, but it's some fantasizing or imagination that sort of mixes in, that tells like a story about what's happening, that can actually prevent you from like really welcoming anger as anger inside of you authentically. Your anger in fours can be triggered by a wide range of things, from feeling misunderstood or unseen to your reacting to slights, whether they're real or imagined. And because your personality style can have a pattern of taking things personally. At the core of it, there's subconscious envy or sense of deep inadequacy uh, that can be at the bottom of why anger has arisen. So, woo, moving into the head or mental triad, five, six, and seven, where again, fear is more at the surface there, but that doesn't mean anger doesn't live there as well. So, starting with type fives, fives are not usually outwardly expressive with their emotions at all, much less anger, which doesn't mean they don't have them. So important, because it can really hurt fives when people say that they're like cold or emotionless, when inside them they may not feel that way at all. And they can sometimes feel like they're just this open book when most of us just can't read what's going on. But that's because fives can readily compartmentalize inside and mentalize their feelings, including their anger. And so when fives really do get angry, it's often, again, this is just a tendency. It's often because someone has violated their time and attention. So they like to be in control of their schedule so they can have the privacy and the space that they need to recharge. So anger can be triggered when personal boundaries are breached because it threatens their withdrawal strategy, which they use to avoid their anxiety or their fear. At the bottom, the core trigger for fives are their concerns about being overwhelmed by their environment and the demands that others have placed on them. And that's coupled with this fear of just being depleted, right? That can be the root of why anger shows up for fives. Six, anger can be most triggered in sixes when their safety is threatened, and by like this frustration that others are not taking their concerns seriously enough, or by a perceived lack of loyalty. So whether sixes express that anger, again, can be a little bit more subtype based, with the sexual uh, six more likely to feel comfortable expressing that anger outwardly. But inside, the trigger often comes out when the security is threatened, trust is broken. Also, sixes can all get very upset when people are undependable. That's the loyalty issue. and lie, break promises. So here again, I want to say the sexual six is a lot more confrontational and outwardly angry. Whereas if you think about the survival strategy of the others is more like aligning or compliant. And so the other subtypes don't want to risk the outer expression of anger because it can make their situation even less secure. Underlying that anger is a fear about an uncertain future, right? Instability, insecurity that drives that anger to be experienced to the surface. And then finally, the seven. Anger can be triggered in sevens if they feel they're being limited, cut off from their options, or being controlled. Like if you get in the way of something they think they really need, forcing a seven into routines and commitments that they don't want to do, whew, yeah, their anger can arise in that space because it threatens the core strategy of running from their inner terror or anxiety and their inner sense of like deprivation. So there's this, like how dare others keep them from what they believe they desperately need, which feels, it's not like a luxury to them. It feels a matter of survival. Even if from the outside we might be like, you don't need to do that, but there's inside that's not often the experience. At the same time, sevens don't spend too much time sitting in anger. They address it, sometimes like joke about it, and then they move on. So at the core, a drive to avoid anxiety through their incessant like activity, including mental activity, is often at the bottom or root of anger in sevens that don't make me feel my fear, right? Like as if you don't let me do this, I will actually start to feel that terror. Again, I don't know that this is always, these deeper core reasons aren't always conscious, right? You gotta actually go down a layer to feel that. So speaking of feeling that, this leads me into our final section, which is part three, welcoming practice. Specifically, I'll guide you through a practice of welcoming your anger. So for those following along in the book, welcoming prayer, come as you are, is practice two in the Enneagram of the Soul, starting on page 54 here, 54 through 56. So you can learn more about the steps there. I'm not going to actually teach the steps here today. I'd rather guide you through a welcoming prayer practice based on the emotion of anger. So if that's not alive for you right now, if you don't have any access to it, you might even pause here and just wait for that to arise in your life. If you're human, it might be very soon that some connection to anger is available. Maybe you're angry at me for my depiction of your type, but with that, if you're ready and you'd like to process or integrate, welcome this human experience of anger and allow it to be integrated into you in a way that fosters your own wholeness and a sense of oneness and ultimately unity that allows for a constructive, ultimately constructive way of expressing anger in your life, in your interpersonal relationships, as well as in your community, then I invite you to join me here now in taking a moment to close your eyes if it's safe to do so where you are. And I will guide you through the welcoming prayer steps. So as you close your eyes, I invite you to bring forth this feeling of anger. You might just have a little bit of it right now, or a massive amount, maybe even some rage. See if it's okay to simply identify the anger and sink into it as a sensation in your body. See if you can notice the felt sense, not needing to think of it as a feeling of anger, but dropping into the sensation of it as it arises in your body right now. And I'll give you a few seconds on your own in the silence as I hold you in prayer, as you make space to sense the anger best you can without judging or analyzing it or trying to figure out why it's there. Just sink into the pure sensation on your own for a few moments now in the silence. And if you need a little longer to stay and be with this anger, I invite you to pause this video. And if you're ready, I invite you to move into step 2, welcoming in the presence of spirit by whatever name. And if you come from a more Eastern or even Buddhist perspective, one way of looking at it is spirits. You can translate that as sort of an oceanic consciousness. And you're dropping this drop of anger into this ocean of being. Allowing it to be held in that larger presence. So you welcome in the presence of spirit, or the awareness of the spirit that is always already present. And then continue to welcome anger, or welcome rage, or welcome frustration. Whatever word resonates, gently welcoming it on your own for a few more moments in the silence, feeling the presence of that more expansive sense of spirit, oceanic. And definitely don't rush through this step. In fact, you can repeat steps 1 and 2 on your own until you can honestly and openly welcome your experience of anger. And if you're ready, I invite you to move into the third and final step with me, which is the step of surrender. Surrender being an inner attitude more so than an outer practice. It is no longer bracing against, but allowing fully. And so here, I invite you to make my words your words as I repeat this prayer aloud for you. I release the need for power and control over this feeling of anger. I release the need for approval and esteem around this feeling of anger. I release the need for safety and security around this feeling of anger. I release the need to change anything about this feeling of anger. And I release the need to change anything about myself. And so it is. Amen. And so it is. Amen. And I'll close with the famous Rumi poem, The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Namaste.